Hi, welcome to our podcast. I'm Ryn.
This is Maria.
This is Sherif.
And I'm Kyle.
Today we're going to be talking about Dr. Joseph Graves, who is a scientist and tenured professor at North Carolina A&T State University. Dr. Graves was the first African American to earn a PhD in environmental, evolutionary, and systematic biology. In 2012, he was asked to write a chapter for Voices of Historical and Contemporary Black American Pioneers and wrote about his experiences with discrimination, racism, and scientific academia, which will be the basis of our discussion today.
So when you look up Dr. Graves' history and previous research on Google Scholar, you'll find that he has 5,952 total citations, I-10 index of 53 publications, and H-10 index of 31 publications that has at least 31 citations. Some of his most popular and cited research papers are the Evolutionary Biology of Aging, published in 1994, and Biological Theories of Race at the Millennium paper, published in 2001. So regarding our thoughts and feelings about the interview and the article, so for the interview, I feel it was short and straightforward. He gave us specific information about his experience, positions, like previous and current, career, research, and the importance of his discipline.
Yeah, I mean, it was really concise. And regarding the article itself, I feel like he gives some really in-depth insight into some of the things that you don't necessarily see people talking about every day when it comes to both academia and, facing the hardships of, uh, injustice and how academia is now and was, and the direction it's going.
Something that kind of stood out to me about it was he kept mentioning about how much discrimination was still like science based, where it's like, oh well, the genetics are different, or things like that, even though they've been debunked by scientists. But then you have scientists who are in different fields where, sure, it's been debunked by geneticists, but if you're not a scientific geneticist and say you're a physicist or you're a chemist, you may, even as like a super intelligent scientist, you may still believe these lies and everybody trusts you because you're just a scientist. They don't think about whether your credibility actually lies in discussing these topics.
Yeah, and I think that going off with Kyle and how he mentioned about the hardships, it's interesting that Graves mentioned that he didn't know it, but he suffered from depression throughout the majority of his academic career, which I think makes sense coming from a minority group trying to surpass the challenges of achieving a PhD and doing postdoctoral work. And he mentioned a couple of things that he wished he would have known before that would have saved him from much of his suffering. It's also interesting that he said that there's aversive racism has taken over our present society, which ironically comes from people who push equality and non-prejudiced agendas. And an example of this that Graves mentions is the discrimination of African Americans who are highly qualified for high prestige positions versus those that are from lower qualified for low positions. And I think this raises the outcome or leads to the low success in Blacks in the science field, which raises those suspects. And so in response to this thinking, I think Gray came up with a few unspoken rules. And the first one he mentions is to acknowledge who are the powerful men that are related in the field and win them over, and being careful to not antagonize them or overly impose too much of the unfamiliar culture upon them. And then secondly, he mentions to know the power relations of stakeholding groups, never overestimate who might be on your side. And this avoids being punished by taking away laboratory equipment usage or any kind of access to editorial boards or committee reviews. The third one he says is to be careful who you trust. Basically, everyone works towards their own self-interest, and you should be present in all of your work. You should present all of your work to benefit the entirety of the institution, not focusing it just on yourself. Fourthly, he also mentions to make sure you choose your battles wisely and fight them intellectually. And then lastly, he said to keep your professional and personal life separate, meaning to not raise suspicion by engaging in any activity that might feel condoned by somebody else's situation, meaning basically to always adhere to the university guidelines.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
oh,
go ahead.
I think that the unwritten rules are, it's really significant to realize that it's such a vigorous, or it's such a rigorous process, and it's so like mentally straining to have to deal with the actual bureaucracy of pursuing a bachelor's, pursuing a master's, and then moving on to your PhD and doing all of your postdoctorate stuff. And even with all of like, you have to keep track of publications, you have to keep track of like advising, you have to keep track of jobs, sometimes you're also teaching classes. And in addition to all of that, you then have these other unwritten rules that everybody around you understands. Even if they're not aware of them, they're still following them. And it's just this huge commitment if you want to pursue this kind of field.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, those are definitely some great points. It's stuff that not, you don't walk in necessarily knowing it, but it's things that you need to know in order to make your journey, smooth and with not a lot of bumps as much as possible. But now segueing into the, more of a little side part to this little podcast we have going here is if you know what you want to do, and if you want to, like Dr. Graves details in Belly of the Beast, there's a very long, rigorous step to gaining achievement and actually becoming successful in academic research. And these are things that nobody really teaches you, and I think he gives some really important details on it, on how to actually become in a position like Dr. Graves has achieved, becoming a complete tenured professor, and being really sustaining his position in his field. I'm going to go over what are these steps from the undergraduate to becoming the tenured professor. And most and foremost, you need to at least obtain you need to obtain your PhD. That is absolutely critical. Without your PhD, you don't have any form of foothold in this door whatsoever. And with the PhD, you need to do lots and lots of research. You need to do as much research as possible, more than the guy next to you. What that means, is that you need to publish very high quality, not just frequency, but really well thought out and really well procedural based research, and publish in as many reputable journals as possible. Preferably top tier. If the person you might be competing with is or was originally accepted, maybe they only did 5. You need to do at least a couple more than that. It's I forgot exactly what he mentions, but it's a rule that you need to do. You need to do more than the guy next to you. And if you're trying to become a professor, of course you need to gain some teaching experience as much as possible. And then beyond that, you need to network. Network. You need to build as many relationships as possible with colleagues, mentors, or other professionals in the same field. And this alone is probably the most valuable thing you need to do in order to gain your tenureship and succeed and actually gain a foundation in the institution you plan to work for or trying to work for. And then you go through the long steps of working at a university or institution for several years before you even get to consider for your tenureship. And throughout that, you need to do all the steps that I mentioned: network, do as much research as possible. And yeah, there's more to that we can even talk about. We can talk about this all day. This can be an entire podcast of its own. But with that, we wanted to go ahead and ask some questions to Dr. Graves if we were able to ask them to him.
Yeah,
Yeah.
these some great points, Kyle. Yeah, so some of the questions that we would love to ask Dr. Graves if we have a chance is in the article Belly of the Beast, Dr. Graves mentioned that he suffered from depression for most of his academic career. We would like to ask him, how did he cope with depression and anxiety while working towards his goals and dealing with other life pressures? And another question that we would love to ask is, um, he also mentioned like it's highly likely that in the foreseeable future, degree attainment, postdoctoral research opportunities, faculty hiring, promotion, and tenure for minorities are going to get tougher. Um, how does Dr. Gravis think the rise of artificial intelligence will impact students from minority groups and their chances from employment? Will it impact it negatively or and make it tougher for minority, or will it be the opposite?
So with those two questions out of the way, thank you for listening to our podcast, and we look forward to talking to Dr. Gravis later this semester.
So thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.